December 1937. A cold winter wind swept through the streets of China's capital city, Nanjing. Children hid beneath beds. Mothers held their babies tightly against their chests. Fathers stood helplessly at windows, listening to the distant sound of gunfire growing louder with every passing hour. No one knew exactly what was coming, but everyone could feel it. Within days, one of the darkest chapters in human history would unfold. A nightmare so horrifying that even eyewitnesses struggled to describe it. A nightmare that would leave streets covered with bodies, homes consumed by flames, families erased forever. For 6 terrible weeks, Nanjing became a city of terror, and nearly 90 years later, the world is still haunted by what happened there. This is the story of the Nanjing Massacre, the 6 weeks of horror the world tried to forget. But before we begin, if you enjoy powerful true stories from history, be sure to subscribe to Real Story Network, turn on notifications, and join us as we uncover the events that shaped our world. To understand the horror of Nanjing, we must first understand the war that brought it there. In 1937, tensions between China and Japan exploded into full-scale conflict, known as the Second Sino-Japanese War. The fighting was brutal. Cities burned, villages vanished, thousands died. As Japanese forces pushed deeper into China, they captured city after city. Their next target was Nanjing. At the time, Nanjing was the capital of China. It was a city filled with government offices, schools, hospitals, markets, and nearly 1 million civilians. Many believed the capital would be defended at all cost, but events moved too quickly. After a devastating battle in Shanghai, Chinese forces were exhausted. They retreated toward Nanjing while Japanese troops followed relentlessly. As news of the approaching army spread, panic swept through the city. Thousands attempted to flee. Roads became clogged with desperate families carrying whatever they could save. Some pushed carts loaded with blankets. Others carried elderly relatives on their backs. Many simply ran. They feared what might happen if the city fell. Sadly, their fears would prove justified. By early December 1937, Japanese forces had surrounded Nanjing. The city was trapped. Chinese soldiers prepared for a final defense, but morale was collapsing. Many knew they were outnumbered. Many knew defeat was coming. On December 13th, Japanese troops entered the city. The Battle of Nanjing was over. The nightmare had begun. What happened next shocked even experienced war correspondents. International observers who remained inside the city soon began documenting scenes of unimaginable violence. Prisoners of war were rounded up. Groups of civilians disappeared. Gunfire echoed day and night. People who had survived the battle now found themselves trapped in a city where law and order no longer existed. Witnesses later described soldiers moving from street to street, dragging people from homes and shelters. Families were separated. Many never saw each other again. Within hours of the occupation, fear consumed every neighborhood. Nobody knew who would be taken next. Nobody knew where it would end. Amid the chaos, a small group of foreigners attempted something extraordinary. Missionaries, teachers, doctors, and businessmen who had remained in Nanjing created what became known as the Nanking Safety Zone. Their goal was simple: protect civilians, save as many lives as possible. The zone became a refuge for hundreds of thousands of desperate people. Families crowded into schools. Churches became shelters. Parks became camps for refugees. Every available space filled with frightened civilians hoping they would be safe. For a brief moment, it seemed the plan might work, but the violence outside the zone continued. And soon, even the refuge itself would be tested. The people hiding there had escaped the battlefield, but they had not escaped the terror. As days passed, reports of atrocities spread throughout Nanjing. People whispered about entire groups of prisoners being taken away. They whispered about neighbors who vanished overnight. They whispered about streets where bodies lay abandoned. Many civilians stopped leaving their shelters altogether. Food became scarce. Fear became constant. Every knock on a door sent hearts racing. Every distant scream reminded residents that nowhere felt truly safe. The city that had once been China's proud capital was becoming something else. A place where survival from one day to the next felt like a miracle. Foreign observers filled diaries with descriptions of what they witnessed. Many later testified that the scale of the violence was unlike anything they had ever seen. And tragically, the worst was still to come. The city had fallen. The fighting was over. But for the people of Nanjing, the true nightmare was only beginning. Winter settled over the city like a blanket of silence. Yet beneath that silence was fear. Every morning, survivors awoke wondering if they would live to see another sunset. The streets that had once been crowded with merchants, students, and families now felt haunted. Doors remained shut. Windows stayed covered. People spoke in whispers. Nobody wanted attention. Nobody wanted to be seen. Yet hiding offered no guarantee of safety. Throughout the city, civilians searched desperately for food and water. Many had already lost everything. Their homes were damaged or destroyed. Their loved ones had disappeared. Their future had become uncertain. The normal rhythms of life vanished. Schools closed. Businesses stood empty. Entire neighborhoods seemed frozen in terror. For countless families, every hour became a struggle to survive. Among the most vulnerable were captured Chinese soldiers. Thousands had either surrendered or been separated from their units during the battle. Many attempted to remove their uniforms and blend into the civilian population. Others believed surrender would spare their lives. But for many, that hope never came. Witnesses reported large groups of prisoners being gathered together and taken away. Some were marched to the outskirts of the city. Others were transported to locations along the Yangtze River. Very few ever returned. International observers later described hearing continuous gunfire in the distance. Again and again, day after day, the sounds became part of daily life, a grim reminder that terrible things were happening beyond the city streets. Years later, investigations and testimonies would reveal the enormous scale of these killings. For survivors, the memories never faded. Many spent the rest of their lives remembering fathers, brothers, sons, and friends who disappeared and never came home. Inside the Nanking safety zone, hundreds of thousands of civilians crowded together. The conditions were difficult. Food supplies were limited. Medical care was scarce. Disease spread easily among large groups living in close quarters. Yet despite these hardships, people remained. Because outside the zone, the danger felt even greater. Parents tried to comfort frightened children. Families shared what little food they possessed. Strangers helped strangers. In the middle of one of history's darkest moments, acts of kindness still survived. People who had lost everything continued helping one another. Some shared blankets during freezing nights. Others volunteered to care for the sick and elderly. Even in the shadow of tragedy, humanity refused to disappear completely. And it was these acts of courage that gave many people the strength to keep going. Many foreign residents had already fled before the city fell. But a small number stayed behind. They knew the risks. They understood the danger. Yet they chose not to leave. Missionaries, doctors, teachers, businessmen. These individuals became witnesses to history. One of the most notable was John Rabe. Despite being a citizen of Germany, he used his position and influence to help establish and manage the safety zone. His diaries later became some of the most important records of what happened in Nanjing. Others worked tirelessly alongside him. They sheltered refugees, delivered food, provided medical treatment, recorded eyewitness accounts, and documented evidence. Many spent sleepless nights responding to emergencies and attempting to protect civilians. They were not soldiers. They carried no armies. Yet their actions saved countless lives. Without their efforts, the death toll might have been even higher. Without their diaries, letters, and reports, much of the world might never have learned what happened. As weeks passed, reports slowly began reaching the outside world. Journalists published articles. Missionaries sent letters. Diplomats forwarded eyewitness accounts. Photographs emerged. Testimonies circulated. The picture that formed was horrifying. People across the world struggled to comprehend the scale of the tragedy. How could such things happen? How could an entire city experience so much suffering in such a short period? For many readers, the reports seemed unbelievable. Yet the evidence continued to grow. Documents, photographs, eyewitness statements, personal diaries. Together, they painted a picture of a city consumed by violence and fear. The truth could no longer be hidden completely. The world was beginning to see what Nanjing had endured. History often focuses on numbers. Thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. But behind every number was a human being. A child who wanted to grow up. A mother protecting her family. A father trying to keep everyone safe. A student dreaming of the future. For the survivors, life after the massacre would never be the same. Many carried emotional scars for decades. Some rarely spoke about what they witnessed. Others spent their lives sharing their stories, determined that the victims would not be forgotten. Their memories became a warning, a reminder of what can happen when hatred, militarism, and the dehumanization of others are allowed to grow unchecked. The people of Nanjing had endured one of the most devastating civilian tragedies of the 20th century. And yet many survived. They rebuilt. They remembered. And they told the world what happened. Because forgetting would mean allowing the victims to disappear a second time. By early 1938, the worst of the violence had begun to subside. The screams that had echoed through the city became less frequent. The endless gunfire that had terrified residents day and night slowly faded into the distance. But peace did not return. Not really. Because everywhere people looked, they saw reminders of what had happened. Entire neighborhoods had been devastated. Families searched desperately for missing loved ones. Many never found them. Parents wandered through refugee camps carrying photographs. Children waited for fathers who would never return. Wives held on to hope long after hope was gone. The city itself seemed wounded. The emotional scars were impossible to measure. Some survivors could barely speak about what they had witnessed. Others remained haunted by memories for the rest of their lives. The violence may have ended. The suffering had not. As Nanjing struggled to recover, the war continued. Across Asia, fighting intensified. And soon, the conflict would merge into the even larger catastrophe known as World War II. Millions more would die. Entire nations would be transformed. The tragedy of Nanjing became only one chapter in a century filled with horrors. Yet for those who had survived the massacre, the wider war often felt distant. Their world had already ended once. Every day became a struggle to rebuild lives shattered by loss. Many focused simply on surviving, finding food, finding shelter, finding reasons to continue. Some never spoke of their experiences again. Others quietly documented everything they remembered. They feared the truth might disappear if nobody recorded it. They feared the victims might be forgotten. When wars end, questions begin. What happened? Who was responsible? How can justice be achieved? After the war, investigators began gathering evidence. Documents were collected. Photographs were examined. Witnesses were interviewed. Survivors shared painful memories they had carried for years. Foreign residents who had remained in Nanjing provided diaries, letters, reports, and testimony. Among the most important records were those kept by John Rabe and other members of the safety zone. Their writings offered detailed descriptions of what they had seen. They had documented events while they were happening. These records became critical pieces of historical evidence. Investigators compared accounts from different witnesses. Again and again, The stories matched. The evidence pointed toward a tragedy on an enormous scale. The world could no longer dismiss what had happened as rumor. The facts were becoming impossible to ignore. After World War II ended in 1945, efforts were made to prosecute war crimes committed during the conflict. Military leaders and officials faced investigations. Courts examined evidence from across Asia and Europe. Witnesses came forward. Documents were presented. The events in Nanjing became part of these proceedings. Survivors who had spent years carrying painful memories finally had an opportunity to tell the world what they had experienced. For many, it was not easy. Every testimony reopened old wounds. Every memory brought back images they wished they could forget. But they spoke anyway, because they believed the truth mattered, because they believed future generations deserved to know what happened, and because they hoped such horrors might never occur again. Justice could never restore lost lives. It could never erase suffering. But many felt that acknowledging the truth was an important step. As decades passed, a new struggle emerged. Not a military battle, a battle over memory. How should the massacre be remembered? How should it be taught? How should future generations understand it? For survivors, the answer was simple. Remember the victims. Tell the truth. Learn from history. Yet discussions surrounding the massacre often became controversial. Debates emerged about numbers, responsibility, and interpretation. These debates sometimes created tension between nations and communities. But for many survivors, one fact remained beyond dispute. They had lived through the horror. They had seen the destruction. They had buried loved ones. No debate could erase those experiences. No argument could change what they remembered. Years turned into decades. The children who had hidden in fear became grandparents. The young adults who survived the massacre became elderly. One by one, eyewitnesses grew older. Many worried that their stories would disappear when they were gone. So they spoke. They recorded interviews. They shared memories. They visited schools. They met historians. Again and again, they repeated their message. Do not forget, because forgetting is dangerous. When societies forget the consequences of hatred and war, history can repeat itself. The survivors understood this better than anyone. Their lives became living reminders of one of humanity's darkest chapters. Some people ask why events from nearly a century ago still matter today. The answer lies in the lessons they teach. The story of Nanjing is not only about tragedy, it is also about courage. It is about ordinary people helping one another during impossible circumstances. It is about witnesses who risked their own safety to document the truth. It is about survivors who refuse to let the victims be forgotten. Most importantly, it reminds us of the consequences of unchecked hatred and the dehumanization of others. History is not merely a collection of dates and facts. History is human. History is personal. History is the story of real people whose lives were forever changed. And the people of Nanjing deserve to be remembered. On a cold December day in 1937, the city of Nanjing fell. What followed would become one of the most shocking civilian tragedies of the 20th century. For 6 weeks, fear ruled the streets. Families were torn apart. Dreams were destroyed. Lives were lost. Yet amid the darkness, there were also acts of extraordinary courage. People who protected strangers. Witnesses who documented the truth. Survivors who carried memories for decades so the world would never forget. Today, the voices of many victims have fallen silent. But their story remains. It lives in diaries, in photographs, in memorials, in the testimony of survivors, and now, in the hearts of those willing to listen. Because history is not only about remembering victories. Sometimes, history demands that we remember humanity's failures as well. Not to dwell in the past, but to ensure that such horrors never happen again. This was the story of the 6 weeks of horror the world tried to forget. A story of suffering. A story of survival. A story the world must never forget. If you found this documentary meaningful, please subscribe to Real Story Network, like this video, and share it with others. Every subscription helps keep these important historical stories alive for future generations. And until next time, remember the past, learn from it, and never stop seeking the truth.